thank you to Tom and the organizers. This is the third year for World Ocean Council and second year for me. So very grateful for the partnership and engaging the way we do. In case it's not clear, we are a global membership with a network that it spans the globe, but with a home port that is in Barcelona and a hub in Washington, D.C. And you can imagine two very different sort of mindsets and conditions and attitudes in those two locations and approaches at the moment. And a year ago, among other things, I unexpectedly took over as CEO of World Ocean Council. And so it's been a year of transition for us, everything from logos and branding to our strategies and our goals, programmatic areas and membership structures. This coincided with these changes that we've seen globally and in the European Union, which in some ways was a forcing mechanism for us, as much as it has been for the EU and other places in the world. And that helped us sort of move towards the kinds of things that we're working on and the changes we've made. And sort of following on some of the enthusiasm from the earlier panel, we also see those challenges as opportunities. And opportunities for the EU, opportunities for the work that we're doing and the work that we're doing together. And definitely with collaboration and multilateralism, even though there are others that do not believe so. And for us, what we call corporate ocean responsibility for a sustainable and regenerative blue economy is the focus that we're going in. And that means across our membership, which is quite diverse in terms of its thematics, we believe in the whole of water, which kind of goes back to the idea that blue means everything. We also look at regeneration in the sense of doing what we have to do to recover and do the pre-recovery and resilience work at the same time and do that together with the corporate sector and businesses, startups, and finance. And that means you need the terrestrial, and it was just brought up, which was very helpful. I didn't know what the speech was going to be about, but the idea that what happens on land comes into the water. And often those problems come from the water. So you can imagine the topic of our panel is quite important in the work that we do because it's not really us, it's our members that are looking at this. Everybody from small innovators in Brazil to one of our members is Maersk or MSC, for instance, right? So you can imagine the dynamics between those two kinds of areas. And sad to say, but it's sorely needed now to do more collaboration and multilateralism. So we have to do that, and we'll talk about that on the panel. That is a heavy weight for this panel because we could talk about many things, and so we discussed narrowing a bit what we talk about. And it's already been mentioned, but we had a lot of conversations last year about Ocean Pact and the Ocean Act coming at the end of this year, hopefully. And the STIP, the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan as well. And so these are kind of bookends for us in our conversation, but also for the broader mandate of blue economy. So I will now ask my panelists to come up. I'm not going to do bios. I'm just going to tell you who they are and where they're from, and they're going to talk about themselves as we open up the conversation. But welcoming to the stage, Jakob Haugaard, Climate and Green Transition, Danish Maritime Authority. Matthias Olafsson from eFuel Alliance, the executive consultant, and Julie Olivier, special advisor, EU and international cooperation for the European Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership. By the way, we're all meeting next week. Some of you may be there in Bucharest. I know Tobias will be there and others, some of you, because of these larger blue economy conversations. So without further ado, let's have a conversation. And a round of applause for that, please. So we'll just go down the line, and to introduce what they do and what they're working on, we also sort of are prompting with, given 1 year of Ocean Pact, moving towards the Ocean Act, the STIP coming into play, but also we've already heard today all the different elements of these sort of places that we're in. And we had a chance to talk right before we started today. So we'll go down the line quickly and then move to some in-depth questions, because what the group decided to do is sort of pick 3 things as kind of our levers, and we'll talk about them in more detail and ask you to ask questions. That's public-private partnerships, data and data sharing, and decarbonization. And we picked only 3 because ocean governance and governance broadly is a massive topic. But let's start with this first question. So we'll come to you, Matthias.
Yeah, thanks. And the question being just overall.
Introduce your organization.
Yeah.
And also what that means for you as we move into this conversation.
Absolutely. So, yeah, my name is Matthias Olafsson, and I work for the E-Fuel Alliance. The E-Fuel Alliance is the global association of the e-fuel industry. And just to clarify, e-fuels are those sourced from renewable hydrogen made electrolytically with electrolysis of water. So essentially, these are sustainable fuels that can be used for various purposes, including maritime transport, to enable the overall decarbonization or defossilization of the sector. So we in Maritime work towards facilitating regulation that supports the integration of renewable fuels that might also include advanced biofuels or fuels that essentially are able to address our collective commitment to decarbonization and to our climate targets. Towards that end, we've worked at the European Commission with the European members of the European Parliament on regulations like the FuelEU Maritime Regulation, the extension of the ETS system, and to maritime transport, and to leverage this now existing framework on the Sustainable Transport Investment Program to operationalize in a way that would be effective towards renewable fuel integration. But I guess I'll get a chance to go into that a little bit deeper later.
Thanks, Matthias. Julie.
Thank you. So we've been talking a lot about the Ocean Pact and the Ocean Act, and I'm particularly looking forward to the Ocean Act because of the EU Ocean Observation Initiative, which this Ocean Act should provide a legal basis for. My key message actually is going to be that for effective policy implementation, we need collaborative action, which is grounded in marine knowledge. So the prospect of having a coordinated European ocean observing system, so increase and improve value chain for marine knowledge is really what we need. And this reflects very well the spirit of the Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership, which I'm delighted to represent today. And I'm not the only one here. My colleague Frode over there from Research Council Norway, Angelo from the Italian Ministry of Universities and Research. I also have Isabel and Gabriel representing GPI Oceans. So the Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership, it's 32 countries through national ministries from different policy fields and research organizations coming together with the European Commission to leverage research and innovation and deliver innovative solutions for the green, digital, and fair transition of the blue economy. So partner countries work together for the identification of research innovation needs for effective policy implementation and to achieve a blue economy which is regenerative, climate neutral, and sustainable. And we mobilize 30 to 40 million euro every year in joint transnational calls. So we're working on the 4th one, which will be launched in next September. And we've identified 4 main intervention areas. So it's about blue biotechnologies. So we have already a lot of great projects bringing new projects on the market. It's also about nature-based solutions. We have coastal resilience for businesses. So I think, for instance, invasive species for against tourism or sea level rise damaging marinas. Another intervention area is about strategic autonomy for the blue economy with new technologies and also digital twins of ocean. And the 4th one is about really actually this multi-use approach by design promoted by the Ocean Act. So where we really try to find solutions for coexistence and to deliver the knowledge we need for environmental preservation.
Great, thanks. Jakob, over to you.
Yes, my name is Jakob Haugaard, and I'm Director for Climate and Green Transition in the Danish Maritime Authority. So to this panel I bring a government perspective. We are focusing on promoting the green transition of shipping through regulation and through partnerships. And I will touch upon those aspects during the discussion.
Great. That's a great segue, because the first topic we narrowed to was the public-private partnerships. You can imagine that we could do an entire session, an entire day just on this subject, but we wanted to prompt each of them as we talk through this, because there's a question of their types, their uses, their themes, and here successes and best practices. In some ways, what Julie described already, that we're also a part of, and we'll see each other next week as well, is one of those ways that this is starting to work. But we wanted to figure out and have a bit of a conversation with all of you as well, about public-private partnerships and how we use that for multilateralism and collaboration. So Jakob, why don't we start with you, since you left off right there, and tell us more about that.
Yes. Well, we believe that partnerships and public-private partnerships are really important to drive the green transition of shipping. Because by promoting a joint vision, sharing experiences, best practices, methodologies, we can do a lot together. So in our case, we have worked for 5 years now in the public-private partnership called Zero Emission Shipping Mission, which is under the auspice of Mission Innovation. And here we work together with the private sector, with the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, Global Maritime Forum, and others. We work together with many different authorities and countries to set a global agenda and show, well, we can do something, and show the way. How do we, for example, assess the needs in the ports for bunkering infrastructure, for new fuels, for electrification? How do you do it in practice? How do you develop methodologies for green corridors, for example? And we do projects together and share the knowledge, not only among European or North American countries, but we also involve other countries such as Ghana, India, Indonesia, etc. And it actually makes a lot of sense, but it also takes time to do this.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we talked about when we were prepping is that how do you continue to convince your leadership and the country to take that time to spend the resources? Like, how do you keep that going? Just to quickly add.
Well, when we do partnerships with developing countries, for example, Kenya, Indonesia, we need to start somewhere where it makes sense. So we don't start talking about alternative fuels and the most sophisticated developments, because that doesn't really make sense in their context. So we talk about energy efficiency. We talk about electrification of domestic ferries, and we do studies together, pilot studies, and try to come up with initiatives where you have a good business case, where it makes sense, and where you bring development to the plate. So you have to look at the local context and start with concrete projects that make sense.
Yeah, context is the word that I think of. Julie, where do you?
Well, partnerships, public-private partnerships, are what makes the regulation, the policies implementable, achievable on a good knowledge basis. I want to give you an example of the projects that the Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership co-fund. We have more than 40 already. One of them is about coastal erosion risk management. So it's about 10 countries coming together to develop a digital twin of ocean to optimize the management of coastal erosion on marine infrastructure. You know that billions are lost every year on marine infrastructure that way. So we have companies, all our projects involve the private sector, because this is the way that you can have a comprehensive innovation ecosystem. And to get back to this example of coastal erosion, we have also a public authority which is in charge of setting standards for advanced material. So I think this really shows that with public-private partnerships you can bridge to implementation. You can bridge between industry and the achievement of the policy. And we know that, of course, shipping standard is a soft power, right, for global competitiveness.
And I think for us, I didn't mention it, but last fall we launched the Center of Excellence for Coastal Resilience with the port and the city of Barcelona, as well as 2 global partners. But just as a call for ideas, because it's so vast that you have to start to pick things. So I think, hearing you pick that with those 10 countries also gives me hope that there's a way to start down the path, because that's another very, very big subject as well. So Matthias, in terms of public-private partnerships, where are you headed?
Yeah, so essentially, as a representative of the renewable fuel supply chain, the way I see public-private partnerships are instruments to facilitate decarbonization of shipping or sustainability in shipping. And there are multiple ways to address the problem. We can look at efficiency enhancement in shipping, and we can look at coating of hull or many different ways. But the most effective way to achieve drastic cuts in greenhouse gas emissions in shipping is transitioning the fuel supply. And in order to do that, at this point, what we've seen in public-private partnerships so far is that they've delivered meager results in terms of advancing pilots. But we are at a stage in this process now with upcoming targets and mandates for 2030, which will have significant implications for the shipping sector globally, is that we need to move from pilots to scaling a fuel supply chain. And public-private partnerships are excellent instruments to do that. I'll name some examples to it. So essentially, buyers' alliances, where demand aggregation is conducted. Essentially, multiple entities come together, aggregate demand between different entities so that the overall risk is reduced. And that impacts also the economics of the fuel project, with the cost of capital being reduced. So further, something about mentioned in the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan was double-sided auctions, essentially where the gap is bridged by a public entity coming in terms of meeting the cost of the transition in the near term. Again, that also addresses the attainability of the fuel project. The same goes for contracts with difference, similar model. I won't go into the nitty-gritty here. Finally, I think I'd mention something that Jakob already mentioned was green corridors. I think what we've seen so far, this is an instrument, it's a mechanism that is very impactful. Well, it has the potential to be impactful for renewable fuel integration and decarbonization of shipping, but it hasn't been so far, not to the extent that the hopes were laid out for it. And I think what has been missing in the public-private partnerships there is the public part, where the regulator comes in, deploys its authority and its public funding to advance these projects. And you asked before, well, how do you spur that willingness on behalf of the regulator, on behalf of the authority? And I think we've already done that with existing instruments now, placing legal obligations on our industry and on this particular mobility segment, shipping, only 4 years from now. So this is the year of reckoning. This is the year we need to start investment in the fuel supply chain to deliver these volumes to market. And green corridors is an excellent way to do that.
Yeah, that's a good example. And it also gets to the financing, where it sits, where it doesn't sit, but also taking action. And we heard earlier, right? Lots and lots of papers, lots and lots of conversations, but moving to something that means action and implementation is really important. So one of the other topics we talked about was data and data sharing, and how that can be used. And it can be used in lots of different ways, as we've talked about in other venues. And I think one of the reasons we started talking about it as something for governance and for collaboration and for multilateralism is, if you have good data and you're sharing it and it's used to implement and draw an attention of financiers and even the insurance industry in each of these kind of topic areas becomes very important. So Julie, I'll go to you first, but discuss the sort of data-driven side of it and the sharing. I think also this is a space where there's some tough conversations because not always people and organizations like to share their data openly. So how do we get past this, and what are you working on from that angle?
No, thanks, Stuart. And yeah, there are a lot of challenges. We can talk about that for data sharing, especially between the private and the public sector. And basically, it's not so, doesn't seem always like fun to talk about data, but we really need to talk about it because we're actually in the midst of a ocean data revolution. The blue economy is critically dependent on ocean data. 2/3 actually of the ocean-based climate mitigation relies on ocean observation data. So talking offshore energy, ocean energy with wave and tidal, blue carbon, of course, and it's going to increase because climate change increases in predictability. So we're really seeing an extraordinary explosion in the amount of data, but there is a paradox because the data, most of it is stuck, right? Companies pay for it, collect it, and then it's set aside. That's such a missed opportunity, right, for the blue economy, for research, for policy, making better policies. Look at the UK. They make data sharing or data exchange mandatory alongside the whole offshore development, which means that companies also gain access to data, and that facilitates siting, that accelerates permitting, it saves costs, it optimizes operation. And you just have to look at the figure. The UK is a leader on offshore wind, right? It has more operational capacity as all EU member states. Yeah, so we really need to work on improving data governance in Europe.
And I'll go to you, Jakob, coming from sort of the national level and thinking about it from a maritime sense, but like Julie's already touching on some of the things that solve problems. So how do you use it, and how do you open it from your viewpoint from the maritime ministry?
Talk about the data sharing? Yes. Well, our focus is on at the global level and the EU level. So we try to promote a greater access to data at the global level through the IMO data collection system. And here we must admit it's a tough battle. Not all countries, not all companies agree to this idea to share data, to provide more data. And without data, it's also difficult to regulate. So yeah, we need improvement here, and we need to agree. We don't have any big issues in among the EU member states. We're more or less aligned here. Yeah, but we need to convince other countries and other global industries that this is the way forward. So that's a priority for us to get improvement here and wider access to global data through the data collection system.
Yeah, the private sector members from World Ocean Council, in fact, that are part of what we call this Smart Ocean, Smart Industries program that we started. It's very interesting to see the dynamic between country level, corporate, business level, researchers and scientists who all have their own versions of, and what we're trying to do is bring them together so that ocean data is available to make these kinds of decisions. We talked a bit before we started. How does this affect what you're doing with e-fuels and the use of data or finding the data that's necessary?
Yeah, that's a bit of a tricky one for me as a representative of the renewable fuel supply chain in shipping. But I will say that one of the things that I've noticed from the last few years meetings at the International Maritime Organization's Maritime and Environmental Protection Committee meetings is that this discussion on a global framework for emission reduction, the net zero framework at the International Maritime Organization, one of the arguments that the opponents of this framework, which is absolutely essential for the decarbonization of shipping, one of the arguments that the opponents laid out was that the DCS, the data collection system, was insufficient, and that data exchange and data sharing and data collection couldn't reflect the objectives of the legislation. So I think one of the things we can do collectively in Europe is that ahead of the upcoming negotiations on the framework in October, is to prepare better on this part and be sort of transparent and open and clear about how we propose to progress into a global framework in terms of data collection.
Yeah, and I think in our innovation space and even in fisheries, MPAs, nature-based solutions, whatever it might be, whatever those verticals are, the same kind of conversations are coming up. Like, how do we get to it? How do we prepare for it ahead of time? So before we go to the last sort of lever, I want to go to the audience quickly and see if there are any questions on these two subjects or generally on governance and collaboration and where we see it going within the EU context and policy. So I think there's a microphone floating. Any questions so far? One here? No, I couldn't see. Sorry, I sent you to the farthest end because I couldn't see to my right. Sorry about that.
Hi, I have a question about green corridors. It's always baffled me why wind propulsion isn't included in the green corridors, given that some of the very first green corridors were zero emission and powered by the wind. We've seen an incredible advancement in high-tech modern wind, and there's now more ships with modern wind propulsion than there is with alternative fuels if you exclude LNG. So I'm wondering, why is wind still left out when it could actually make the fuel transition cheaper, and it would deliver nature-based solutions by reducing underwater noise and reducing air pollution as well?
Yeah, maybe that one's more for you, Jakob, but I will say that I've seen green corridor programs where wind propulsion is included. It absolutely should be. It's one of the things. It's the low-hanging fruit in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But maybe do you have examples from your work in that regard?
No, but I think it's a valid question here. So I don't see any reasons why it should not be included because green corridors cover both ports. You need bunkering infrastructure. You need electrification of ports. It covers the fuels. It covers the vessels. So I mean, it's the entire value chain. So I don't see any reasons for not including wind propulsion. So it's also an open invitation to you. You may be right that it has not received a lot of attention, but working with organizations such as the Global Maritime Forum, the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, I mean, should come forward and come with some good examples, and let's see how we can do it. But what is really lacking is implementation, because now we've been doing so many studies for so many years. We have the Clydebank Declaration, we have pilot studies, more pilot studies, but what is lacking is implementation and financing. So that's an issue we need to look at because time is coming for change, not for more studies.
Yeah, and I would agree. Our members say the same thing. We made sure in our event to have wind propulsion and the International Windship Association with us. And the Center of Excellence on Green Shipping includes wind propulsion as one major factor. Because indeed, when we put people on stage to talk about fuels, there's this constant, which fuel, which port, how does it work, which company. It becomes very entangled, as you can imagine, including at the policy level in the EU and elsewhere. So wind propulsion is one of those things that is slightly dynamically different, and we always want to try to include it. So I agree with Jakob, let's have more of those conversations. So next question was over to the right here.
Thank you for the quality of the talks. I think we all agree that in terms of effectiveness and competitiveness, data sharing is a massive point. But still a lot of private and public parties are reluctant for data sharing, and I'm wondering if you could identify, according to you, what are the main reasons of this reluctance, and maybe also share with us how, according to you, we can secure the use or misuse of the eventual data.
Who wants to take that first?
Thank you for the question. There are a lot of challenges to improve data governance, and obviously data sensitivity is one of them. It's complex because it also dependent on the different blue economy sectors, right? When you talk about aquaculture, you won't share data about fish mortality, for instance, but for other sectors, it wouldn't be a problem. Though for transport and energy infrastructure. It's critical infrastructure, so basically all the data is sensitive. So there is a lot of work to do on also bringing clarity over data ownership. There is a lot of work to do on, well, currently there are a lot of restricting data sharing policies, so member states, countries have work to do that to improve regulations. But actually, it's not just we should talk more about data sharing. There is an urgent need to do it because the effective implementation of the European Ocean Pact relies on data-driven marine knowledge, and we need autonomy in data. I want to give you an example. Maybe some of you know the international Argo Program. The Argo Program, it's drifting buoys, which have actually over the past year, they have revolutionized how we understand climate change. Blue economy relies on understanding climate change, right? The data from the Argo float, it's critical to understand sea level rise, to predict extreme weather events, to predict coastal flooding. We need the data. But so now we have currently about 4,000 of these buoys. More than 2,000 are funded by the US, fewer than 1,000 by the European Union. And you know that the American administration is cutting back on the NOAA's budget, and actually even announced that it would eliminate the American Integrated Ocean Observing System. So we can anticipate we won't get this crucial data for the whole blue economy and climate change and all our policies in Europe, right? So there is really an urgent need to make sure that you have data autonomy. So we have work to do there.
Yeah, and just to say, surprisingly, we're part of a collaborative, only one thing we're doing in the United States, and it's about blue data, blue tech, and it's funded by NOAA, and it's a 4-year grant for innovators, and somehow that has survived the purges you've all heard about. And indeed, there is a risk at this moment, right? So there's a need to really accelerate these kinds of things. And I'm happy to share about those particular innovators because it's 4 years of sort of raising the ability to share data and the right kind of data. Anyone else want to take which is a great question. Good, okay. I saw another hand here. Microphone to... Go ahead. That's coming. Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps less a question, more just to complement what Julie said about data and specifically the UK as well. I think it also goes beyond the mandated aspect that the UK Crown Estate developed what they called AWECA, which is the Offshore Wind Knowledge and Evidence Hub. And a lot of the offshore wind developers and the consultancies working on the consenting and the licensing actually voluntarily share the information. But as part of the AWECA, there's also a series of community of practices which are designed to kind of drive forward the adoption of offshore wind. So as you say, I think it's reflected in the figures. But we have looked at this issue of data and this assumption that people won't share it because of the financial, the investment that's been made. But actually, when you look at the environmental consenting and the licensing process, once the data is more than about 4 years old, in most cases, you'd be required to recollect it anyway. So, I mean, there's been a lot of discussions that actually perhaps in the first 6 months, year, that data does have a lot of value. But once you sort of 1 to 2 years down the road, then actually the value in that data commercially, it lessens and people are less concerned about sharing it. So I just want to add that. Thank you.
Yeah, and this raises a point that for a lot of you and those that we work with, sometimes it's the innovation data that's immediate or weather data or things that are absolutely necessary within minutes or seconds, right? Versus things that are long-term and could sort of be recycled or reused. And I think then it gets to sort of the public-private partnerships again. our ports, our cities, and others. Carlos from the Port of Barcelona is here. I mean, has an innovation arm. So which ports, which cities, and which sort of jurisdictions, as well as private companies, then can help you do that, right? That's really important. Any questions before we pivot to the last lever? Okay, great. So, and the last thing we agreed upon is also quite heavy, and that's the sort of who, what, how, why, for decarbonization when it comes to governance and collaboration. Another super weighty topic. So how do we do this? Ships versus ports versus governments versus NGOs of varying types. How do we do this work together when it comes to decarbonization around this kind of topic? And we'll start with you.
Yeah, I go first. Great. So I think for us, it all starts with regulation. That in order to bring about or catalyze this change, we need to address that through regulation. Now we have existing instruments in the European Union that support and facilitate that. And I think we need to look at operationalizing sentiments such as those expressed in the Sustainable Transport Investment Program in a way that recognizes that decarbonization is a value chain effort that requires collaboration, sort of, to use the Brussels speak, holistically. And that means that we learn from what we've had in effect these last few years and modify and advance towards the overall purpose of attaining progress where we haven't. I think for me that means if you look at regulation, we currently have, for example, obligations on fuel suppliers through the Renewable Energy Directive. And in that context, we found that the market is very fragmented. Different member states implement in different manners. Some put targets on certain fuel categories and others choose to place emphasis on onshore power supply. There are different penalty structures for non-compliance, and it's a big mess, to be honest. And on the work program of the European Commission right now, we have the next iteration of the Renewable Energy Directive, where we have an opportunity to deploy harmonized long-term targets, which are binding for fuel suppliers with an effective but aligned fuel penalty for non-compliance. I think we could look at what other industries have been doing. If we look at aviation, they've been more successful in unlocking capital for sustainable aviation fuel development. And they've done that by leveraging regulation such as the ETS system that redistributes those funds towards the objective of decarbonization. And to deploy stringent quotas on the demand side for airlines, which state that give a long-term trajectory towards mid-century for among other things, for renewable fuel integration. I think we need to look at the framework we've created, for example, in the context of renewable fuel integration, to look at the production rules that govern our fuel integration in general. If we look at, for example, the UK, or if we look at the US, we see regulatory regimes that offer more flexibility, more leniency towards the initial ramp up of the fuel supply chain to enable these first investments, remove first mover disadvantages, and advance towards the overall progress of reducing emissions. And I think finally we need to reassess the way in which we deploy funding through existing instruments. I'm not talking about making new regulation. I'm talking about modifying existing regulation through collective effort towards scaling instead of pilot projects. And I'll stop there.
Oh, that's great. And Julie, over to you with the Blue Economy partnership, but more broadly, just generally, the Blue Economy lens on decarbonization. How do we move this, and what other factors might come into play? Thinking about some of the things we'll be talking about next week in Bucharest.
Thank you. About decarbonization and what you said about regulation. Well, decarbonization is of course at the core of what partner countries are doing in the Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership. We need alignment, right? We need systemic alignment. We need policy alignment, and we need also the alignment between policy, development of technologies, of infrastructure planning. I don't want to say much about decarbonization of the shipping industry because I've seen that Jaap has just arrived, and so he's representing the other European partnership that we are working together with exactly on that niche. Actually, I'd like to bring another dimension of what we need for the blue economy. It's not only about being climate smart. It's also about being biodiversity positive, right? Regenerative. I think the METSI plan, the project actually coordinated by the World Ocean Council with this business in nature concept where you really bring the environmental consideration into the business planning is a good example of that. But still with the shipping industry, I'd like to give another example. It's underwater noise. So you know that noise pollution impacts marine mammals, for instance, the communication, it impacts migratory species. So for instance, one of our co-funded projects is about developing sound maps so that we can have mitigation measure in the development, the upscale of offshore wind and the shipping industry. So I think we also need to look at that aspect because it's not only about also improving competitiveness. It's also for companies to be more resilient against climate change costs, right? All is intertwined.
Yeah, that's great. And, we have marine carbon reduction programs and projects as well. And so those don't necessarily get lumped in with decarbonization in the sense of how we're changing fuels, but sequestering and doing it right through biodiversity and other aspects end up becoming part of the plan as well. So, Jakob, from your point, from the country viewpoint, from Maritime, all that who, what, why, how do you do it?
I agree with Matthias that regulation is key to the fuel transition and the wider decarbonization of shipping, because you can't leave it to the market alone. It won't happen. But we both need to stimulate the demand side, and we need to provide incentives for the production of fuels. And we do stimulate the demand side in the EU by the Fuel EU Maritime. The purpose is to gradually reduce the greenhouse gas intensity of fuels and to promote onshore electricity, and thereby live up to the EU climate goals. And it works already. So we hear from many partners that it has created a demand for particular biofuels. It's not taking off yet on the alternative fuels, but it will come. So it actually makes sense. Maybe the reduction target could be more ambitious, but at least the financial penalties are quite high. So it does work. But what we need to do is also to stimulate the production side. And here we hope that this Sustainable Transport Investment Plan will provide it, not only a framework, but also financing. And we do not believe that the current proposal is enough. So we need to see a blue MFF. We need to provide funding for the double-sided auctions. It has to be prioritized. Otherwise, we create a future dependency on alternative fuels from China and other countries. So we need to ramp up here. So that's very important.
Including wind propulsion, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go to questions in the audience again. On this subject, anything else we've already talked about, but any other questions from any of you for the panelists? Wow, everybody must be hungry and wanting to get through the next panel. Okay, so these are some backup, and I warned them I would have some, and maybe not so easy. Governance and collaboration, IMO. Where are we headed? What do we do? It's gonna get touched on, but for this, that's one vehicle, that's one element. How does that affect this conversation that we're having? And Jakob, I'll go to you, and then we'll come back this way.
Well, the IMO is the place for global regulation of shipping. So there's no doubt about it. So we need to focus on IMO climate regulation. We've done that as well, and we have used the existing EU regulation as a lever to show the way that it can be done. So we've learned a lot by the FuelEU Maritime and the ETS. We've developed methodologies, we've developed a life cycle assessment approach. We've developed a method for greenhouse gas targets, etc. So that's really good. But we also need to agree that once and if we achieve our goal of adopting the net zero framework, it'll be incredibly hard. But then we also have to be more open and transparent about our existing regulation in the EU. And I believe it's not fair to have double burdens on the industry, but it's not fair to have double administrative burdens as well. And we also hear this from developing partners. They do not believe it's fair either, because they pay indirectly for the green transition in Europe through the FuelEU Maritime and the ETS. So we need to be clear and communicate more clearly that if we manage to agree on global regulation at the IMO, then we simply need to scrap the EU regulation to avoid double burdens.
If I may, Stuart. So I've been doing advocacy at the International Maritime Organization for the past 6 years, and I've been continuously baffled by the spirit of collaboration in there. There are 500 people in a working group. I can barely agree in a group of 3, and we were there, discussing a very impactful regulation. And it progressed towards a very constructive framework, which was under discussion in last October when everything went downhill. Obviously, it's mostly because of the United States position. Let's address that elephant in the room right away. But there are ways, in retrospect, if we talk about what can we learn from this and how can we sort of, as Europe, amend our approach. Is precisely to Jakob's point, is that Europe was not transparent about what would happen to the regional mechanisms as we progress into a global framework. Yes, FuelEU Maritime does have a revision clause that is supposed to reflect progress in global shipping, where it says that in the event of a robust climate framework being implemented, then we would consider morphing that regulation into the global regulation. But what those parameters are, how we define robust climate framework, was not a part of the negotiation strategy of the European Union. So far, also the EU ETS completely, that part was used as an argument against the global framework, because they would say, well, if Europe is doing its own thing, why wouldn't single countries across the world do so as well? And that would have very conflicting, burdensome impact for shipping. So I think what we can learn from this is that moving towards October 2026, when the net zero framework will be discussed again at the International Maritime Organization, it's absolutely essential that Europe comes prepared with regards to how it perceives its own regulatory framework being integrated into the global framework.
Great, absolutely. Julie, anything to add?
The EU Ocean Pact sets really high ambition, really high standards, and now, that sounds unilateralist, but it's also necessary for policy consistency at European level, right? So at the end, when you push upwards at global level, you see at the long term there are other examples. If you can export it, it becomes legitimate when other countries kind of adopt it and use it as a reference. This is really what the European Union is trying to do, right? As the ocean governance leader at European level. And maybe just briefly an example of how the European Union also kind of exports its regulatory framework. It's also through science diplomacy, right? The Horizon Europe, the EU Research Innovation Framework Program, it's the biggest, the largest global research innovation program. So for instance, the Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership is also in Brazil, for instance, or in Tunisia. And when you work on a science topic, you also export values, for instance.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one of the things that we've seen on things like the High Seas Treaty, which finally came through and it's being put into force, it took some time. We did not have that luck on the Plastics Treaty, but I think with IMO, I'm still hopeful. And you're right, there's really one problem in the room out of that 500 probably, and I can say that. But we have run out of time, so I want to give a big round of applause to our panelists for taking on this weighty subject. Thanks very much.
Thank you.